All right, thank you very much. It is my great pleasure and privilege to moderate this very beautiful session. First of all, I'd like you to put your hands together for yourselves for making it here. And I say that because I do not believe that this is just a talk shop. I believe that in this room and in this space, we can strike chords that would transform Africa's media. So thank you very much. And like she said, my name is Jake Okechukwu Effoduh. This promises to be very exciting because we have very interesting panelists here who will be speaking from different areas of their expertise. People from telecommunications, visual media, content production, and digital innovation. First of all, it is my honor to introduce to you Joseph Hundah, who is the president and CEO of Econet Media. Please put your hands together for him. He's the ex-vice president and CEO of Modern Times Group in Africa, an international entertainment broadcasting group with the second largest geographical broadcast footprint in Europe. So currently, he's the president and CEO of the Econet Group. We also have Seko Shamte, who does not need any introduction. She is a producer, a writer, a director, a creator, innovator. And I mean, she's so many things. With, done one feature, one series, 13-part series, and several documentaries. Please put your hands together for her. It's very important. Very important to see ladies who are taking over these spaces and taking it with full force. That's the formation right there. By my right is Mr. Ade Olufeko, who's the owner and chief platform strategist of Visual Collaborative. I would say this, he's part of the first and the second digital revolutionary in Africa. He's an international curator and a cognitive technologist. If you check olufeko.com, olufeko.com, you would see just, I don't want to spoil it for you, but have a good time with that. But please put your hands together for him. And then we have Jono Hobbs, the Chief Innovation Officer and the founder of Dragon Media. Based in Lusaka, he's very passionate about fusing local creativity and knowledge with international expertise and disruptive technology to build a pioneering media company in Africa. Over the last 18 months, Jono has been responsible for launching and relaunching 7 global brands in 5 countries in the African continent. Please put your hands together for him as well. Okay, so we're going to be here for less than an hour. I'll just give a little skeletal framework of what we're going to be doing here. We spent about 5 minutes already. I will introduce this session very, very briefly, and then I'll ask one question each to our speakers, and then after that, I'll open it to you guys to just drill out everything you can drill, get what you can get from there. You can combine, you can mix it like a big pot of stew, get from here, get from here, get from here, and probably give credit to them as well. And then finally, we would wrap up with the session in just 5 minutes. Please don't forget the hashtag is OxAfrica17. You can go to the conference website, www.oxfordafricaconference.com, or you can use the WOVA app, which has been fantastic. You get the agenda updates, you can like, follow, you can comment, and also thank the organizers for this beautiful and wonderful session. All right, without wasting much time, let's kick in. You don't need a town crier to tell you that media in Africa and in the world has definitely transformed globally. We're in the 4th industrial revolution in the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're hearing of 3D printing, nanotechnology, biotechnology, the Internet of Things, robotics, and the rest of that. But it's very critical that Africa still is within the 2nd and 3rd industrial revolution. We're asking ourselves, do we have electricity or do we not? Do we have Wi-Fi or do we not? So these are very critical, especially within the media space. But some people are not letting it go. We see very promising apps for women to be able to give birth. We see apps like Uber and the rest of that disrupting the entire space. When it comes to media, this is very critical. We see blogs gaining millions of followers, and then people like me who are on radio are like, listen to us now, But we cannot rest in the 2nd and 3rd industrial revolution. Whether we will leapfrog or whether we will drag ourselves to the 4th industrial revolution, we will do that either ways. So while this conversation is broad, I'd like us to focus a bit around digital entrepreneurship, but about the media concerns and the perspectives within this space. So my first question would be to you, Mr. Joseph. And, sorry, it's couched very nicely. So a lot has been written about, digital dividends, what people can get from the digital space, especially when it comes to the media. So what would you say are the problems within the continent when we talk about digital dividends? What are the problems that you see? First, tell us the problems, then you can tell us the opportunities, because we already know that, there's a huge gap from Africa and the world.
Thanks. I think it depends on how you define digital dividend. There's quite a few technical definitions of what that could mean, right? But the biggest one probably is what will happen when the continent moves from analog to digital. And out of that is supposed to come a proliferation of content via digital means, technically. But you could also explain it from the point of view is we all have all these technologically revolutions that are taking place in the digital sphere, and how does media fit into that? And in Africa, really, when you're talking about digital, it's really all about the mobile phone and what you do around the mobile phone. But I was just telling some young people outside yesterday that the problem with Africa is that 10 years ago, they spoke a lot about if you were trying to make a pitch to an international investor, the first thing you said was, well, seven of the top 10 fastest growing economies in the world are Africa. But I think we've kind of fallen off the radar on that now. And the big thing now that people are talking about is how young the continent is and mobile. And if we don't harness these two things pretty quickly, the business imperatives that will drive us to go to that direction would disappear. So yes, we had the fastest growing economies in Africa, but what really happened with that? And I think in this case, what we're trying to do at Econet Media is trying to harness as much as possible content that can be delivered via the mobile phone. Because unfortunately, all the kids nowadays have the mobile phone. And because they have the mobile phone in their hands, we're trying to capture some of that time. I think on average, people spend about 170 minutes a day on their mobile phone. So if we can get 30 minutes of that a day, then we're doing something. So in Africa, it's all about mobile phones and how media begins to translate through the mobile phone in Africa.
Great. So someone who's an expert in this space, right? We talk about an Africa where, this is widening the gap from the people in the villages who can't afford the mobile phones to the people in the cities who are using these phones to do extraordinary things beyond making a phone call or sending a text message. How do you think we can sort of narrow or closing this gap?
I think, first of all, the price of smartphones, which is the only way you can really deliver true content, is still quite expensive. The price is dropping quite dramatically. And once we get to under $100 for a mobile phone, I think we'll begin to get some major traction. That's the first thing. So access to the product, is a problem, right? It's just too expensive. So we need a cheap solution for smartphones in Africa. But more importantly is the cost of data in Africa. It's just too expensive, right? So, as a business, if you're trying to juxtapose offering content at a favorable price, you also have to worry about how is the person going to consume it. And if they're going to consume it at current rates of cost of data, you're going to have a problem. You have no business. So if we can reduce the entry price into the product, which is on mobile phones, people in the rural areas can access them, but the cost of data has to drop significantly. And the mobile network operators have got a big role to play in that happening.
Okay. All right, Seko, I would give you a lot of time to talk on this panel because I want you to speak a whole lot more. Okay. It's very rare to find a lady in the space that you're in, as a writer, as a director. There's a lot of calling you need to make. There's a lot of stamping your feet. I want this. You need to do. So before I ask you any question around this, how did you get to where you got to?
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I started working in media when I was 17 years old. I started off in radio. I was discovered. I was in my school drama and music club, and I was doing something, performing somewhere, and somebody said, hey, you've got a great personality. You should try out for a radio show. I was like, cool. I had a gap year between when I finished my O-levels and when I went to university because I skipped A-levels. So I was like, let me try it. So from the moment I did my first audition on radio, I was hooked. I was like, this is it. I was supposed to be an engineer. I told my dad, it's not happening. And of course, he was deeply concerned. So from there, from radio, I happened to catch somebody's eye or ear, and they're like, oh, you're really good on radio. You should be on camera. And that did not work out. I got in front of the camera, I froze, and that's when I realized I'm not supposed to be in front of the camera, I'm supposed to be behind the camera. So, where I had to switch majors in university because I said I was going to do engineering initially, and then I was like, I'm going to switch to communications or media studies, and my dad was like, let's compromise. You've done a lot of math and stuff, maybe you can move to finance, and then you can do media as a minor, and the finance background will help you with being a producer, and it's true. So I jumped headfirst into that, and I became head of programming for a TV station called East Africa Television, which canvassed Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And I did that up until 2008. And that was a fantastic experience, and I learned a lot about programming for not only Tanzania, but programming for Africans. Programming, I think in many ways we assume that because we're under the umbrella of being Africans, yes, we are. We do have a lot of commonalities, but there are also a lot of differences. And I really learned that the hard way, even though I was programming just for Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and we more or less have a very similar historical background and what have you, but we're quite different. And we were even talking earlier today about how you'd have shows, and some of them would track really, really well in Kenya, and it would be the direct opposite in Tanzania, you know? And so that really taught me about the nuances and the differences, and that sometimes it's not, you can't just say, well, this is African, and so everyone's in Africa is going to like it. And so from there, I left in 2008 because I wanted to pursue other things. East Africa TV was very entertainment driven, and there were other things that I was interested in doing, especially reclaiming African history. So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I remember I did middle school in Tanzania, and I remember we once had this history class, and we had a war in Tanzania called the Maji Maji War, and it was a big deal because basically the local shaman and the local witch doctors had told them, like, you know, if you put some water on yourself, Maji means water, that the bullets from the Germans, if they would hit you, they would turn into water. So that was the whole belief system, and people, you know, the warriors went in. But the way that the history teacher told us this story, he told us from a perspective, even though he's Tanzanian, and he's just as black as me, the way he told it, it was like, oh my God, we are so stupid. Why would we believe that could happen? And it was the way that our history was told to us, and you would go home and you'd really think about it and be like, are we stupid? I don't, like, you know? And, you know, I'd have these conversations with my dad, and my dad would be like, well, why is it, for example, when Catholics go to church, they take holy water and they cross themselves, or even when they did go into war, they would do the same thing. And these ideas of spirituality and faith, and why is it when it's one culture it's acceptable, but when it's another culture it's not? And so I was like, yeah, you're right about this. And so that was always burning at the back of my mind, how our history is presented to us by us.
So did this inform your writing, your producing,
Very
your
much
directing?
so. Very, very much so. The first kind of big project that I did was on a Tanzanian chief named Mkwawa, and he had an amazing life story. But again, I wrote it from our perspective. So rather than reading it in some history book where they'll say things like, well, we're here to civilize the Africans, you tell it from Mkwawa's perspective, and he's like, listen, I'm here, I'm minding my own business, I'm running my empire, you came from across the ocean to invade me. You know, so it's really, I mean, these are the things that drive me. And I think that a lot of work that I do, I am very, very wary of the white gaze. I tell things from the Tanzanian or African perspective, and and this is, you know, it's gotten me in a lot of trouble because, I mean, even when you're looking for financing for stuff, you'll always get the question like, okay, so then, but then why can't we have but then why would you, you know? And and you'd be like, no, there's not going to be a white savior in this story. It's Africans saving themselves, and you know, getting financing for stuff like that is actually, it's more difficult. And even going to film festivals, and a lot of film festivals, they're going to look at the story and they're like, but where's the white person in this who's gonna, right? And I made that decision early on. I was like, this is my lane. This is what I do. I might not be able to this is my contribution, to tell our stories from our perspective.
So did you, by any chance, so I'm going to get to you very soon, because this is a really male-dominated space,
It
right?
is.
The story, they say when you tell stories, you can say it from a perspective that would not really reach the identity of other people. Did you find it difficult breaking into this space? Did you find privilege, like, oh, I'm the only one talking from a woman's perspective, or I'm the only one talking from an African perspective, or was it very stifling?
Well, I mean, when I did find that when I was directing men, sometimes they'd want to mansplain things to me.
Mansplain.
Mansplain things to me. You ever heard of a mansplain?
I have. On Twitter, though.
They'd want to mansplain things to me. I'd be like, no, I actually really know what I'm doing. And I was once shooting in a very remote part of Tanzania, and I was trying to direct some guys. They were not actors, but I needed them to do some things. And I remember this guy was giving me so much pushback, and I was like, you know what? Just leave my set. Go. And he couldn't believe it. I was like, go. So I mean, I do definitely, as a woman, I definitely run into a lot of sexism, but it's not kind of on the forefront of my mind. It's like, well, I'm still the director, though.
Great. Okay, so Mr. Ade, I want to ask you about, Joseph has talked about, the gap when it comes to mobile phones and access to data. I want to talk about regulation and governance. Sometimes there's certain things you cannot do because of the understanding of the law or regulation from government. As a human rights activist, we hear about what happened in Uganda, where a lady is trying to talk about sexual reproductive health for young girls, and then they used a criminal something, online media something act to sort of arrest her. So beyond this space, do you find that the regulation and the laws in Africa are quite supportive or promoting to digital technology in your business area?
That's a good question. Hi, everybody. Like Seko over here, I've gotten in trouble, just innovating. So I have a policy, say the truth and leave town right away. Okay. So regards to governance and regulators, when we're talking about creating digital legacies or any concept of idea you have, innovate as quick as possible. As quick as possible. Don't worry about these so far you're not violating any, basic laws where you create something and a town is, pillaged and the leader is imprisoned. Common sense things. But my advice to people out there creating meaningful content is to innovate. Innovate as quickly as possible, create solutions for people, and then afterwards the government would say, oh, okay, these people are now waiting for us. And that's usually what happens.
So do you see a Silicon Valley in any part of Africa, and where would you locate these valleys?
There's a Silicon Valley right now.
And I
not
apologize
called
for actually calling it Silicon Valley, but I just wanted to use a word to help you understand what I meant. So where would you locate this hub, and where are these hubs? Where are the young, thriving ones? I know
that's a great question. The first, let's look at Mark Zuckerberg. Mark came into Africa last 8 months ago. People said, what is Mark doing? He went straight for the hubs. You have hubs in Yaba. You have hubs in Kenya. You have, where's M-Pesa? M-Pesa is in Kenya. Yes. So you have these hubs, and you have South Africa, and these different hubs are already interacting with each other. They have people using blockchain, concept of blockchain and Bitcoin. People have the common African narratives. My father died and left the land, So it's like, and there's this family fight here and there. So right now there are cornerstones on the continent that are creating solutions to address these issues. and Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, and a few other regions as well.
Great. Okay, let me come to you, Mr. Hobbs. Let's talk about digital, right? We keep saying there's certain things we can use digital technology to do, like, book a taxi, order food, but we can't. There's no app for electricity, water, and some other basic things. And with the way you grow exponentially within the African space, what do you think is a solution to this?
Hi, everyone. So, first of all, we're a creative agency and a production house, but we do management consultancy as well. And the reason why we end up doing the management consultancy often is because there's no point in doing the creative agency and the production if the business is not in the right place for the campaign to work in the proper way. And so that's been like a really informative place for us, is to kind of go back and actually question the questions and go back to the original idea, why do we do things? And my largest client is a company called Aframax that owns the Vodafone franchise in 4 markets. And they are a really interesting company, very innovation-driven. And, certainly, I'm only half qualified to talk about this because I think, someone across the panel, is doing a lot of stuff in this space as well. But the thing that I keep on seeing is that there is consistently the opportunity to innovate with digital, but you've got to have, I think, the willpower and the firepower to do it, because it's not an easy thing. You start off with a great idea, but then you come up with 100 obstacles. We always. And one of the great things that I'm lucky enough to do is that we are creating next generation SME products through mobile technology to help incubators to get moving. And one of the big things that we kind of keep on coming across is people have the idea, but before they really can kind of get moving, they find that they've got the 100 issues to get through. And so obviously incubators are a fantastic starting point, but actually it kind of gets back to the roles of the big mobile operators and the big corporates to get behind these guys to help say, actually, out of your 50 problems, 30 of them we can probably help you with. The other stuff, I think there's solutions outside of Africa that we can borrow and we can arbitrage with. And the last bit in the middle, well, guess what, guys? That's why you're here, and that's why we believe in you. And I guess on a personal level, the one thing that I see is that innovation is kind of directly proportional to the amount of inspiration you have about the cause you're trying to deal with. So if you actually have a passion for something, I think it's a lot easier to innovate. Whereas if you're trying to answer a solution for, let's say, for money or fame or other things, you don't tend to have, let's say, the extra 20 or 30% you need, because you're going to get beaten down a lot along the way. And then I guess the other thing as well is, when we're talking about building technology to support other areas, say water or electricity, mobile operators have a suite of products for, paying your electricity bills or, being able to do this, that on mobile. But the problem is that it's actually about getting to scale with these things, because I see a lot of apps that are developed, a lot of things that exist, but they're not to scale. And if they're not to scale, then you can't get the reinvestment. You can't get the reinvestment. You can't go to the next phase. So there's a lot of kind of phase 1 things that I see out there, but the question is like, how do you get it to phase 5, to phase 6? And again, and it's kind of been one of my themes, I guess, today is like, how do you get the role of the big corporates in Africa to participate in this space? And that's a value proposition, I think. And I just wanted to quickly say one more thing, because Joe touched on this as well, is like getting excited about young people and mobiles is, it's been the way that I experience Africa is through this paradigm. And, for the more expensive mobile technology range, the FD network guys, the mobiles were $120, $150 a year and a half ago. India's now dropped the price to $40. So, it is exciting. And then on the other hand, we talk about data, and, data is expensive in Africa. But on the other hand, I just paid £15, I think, for 5 GB here, because I've overrun my prepaid network here. So the cost price of data is still expensive, but it's the packages that the operators create that could become more affordable. But to do that, we have to have confidence and credit, and that's a whole other story that we can kind of get into.
Great. I would ask one question, and you all can answer it very sharp, swift, and then I'll open to the audience to ask their question. Now, this is about opportunities. Maybe a young investor, a young academic, somebody who's interested in transforming the media in the African space, be it through a blog, an app, or whatever. you talked about mobile phones growing exponentially in Africa, and Africa has the largest youth population. So we have very agile people, quick to learn, quick to interrupt, and everything. In one sentence or two, where do you see the greatest opportunity for the continent?
From a young entrepreneur's perspective?
From your perspective.
Oh. From my perspective, I realize that in the short term, we'll have to make money from traditional media. So it'll be television, the short term. But in the long term, it definitely has to be mobile. But the issue is, what kind of content are you going to create for mobile? That's really the problem right now, is no one has the answer.
That's very interesting, because I'm happy to hear that we traditional media people, we in radio, we're not going to phase out.
You're not dead. TV is dead. Long live TV.
Yesterday afternoon, I was on Lake Naivasha in very close to Nairobi in Kenya, and I spent the whole day, morning to night, on the lake with the local people there, drinking 100% made Kenyan beer. So I was just in this space, out in the water, and these guys who had no access to phones and anything were educating me, this is why you should do this is why you should do that. I'm telling you, and I was just thrilled as to how they get information. So I understand that the storytelling that we make in our local communities is almost as powerful, because they were talking to me about election and where the world would be in 20 years. I was like, what do you know about where the world will be in 20 years? So I'm leaving Lake Naivasha to be here in Oxford. I'm just finding this very good correlation. So thanks for that. Where would you say that pot of gold, where would you locate it?
I would definitely agree with, is that a cop-out? No, but I would definitely agree with Joe. It's mobile phone. I mean, more than, even in my own peer group, these old school contraptions, what are they called, that you mount on the wall? Everybody watches stuff on their phone. And Tanzania, the data, like you said, we have pretty good packages. We have pretty good data packages. And there are a lot of us on social media. Tanzanians are very visual. So there's, at least 5 or 6 million of us on Instagram, for sure. And some of these, there's actually there's a woman, and she's very interesting because she's disrupting a lot of what's going on, even in the political arena in Tanzania. She's based out of LA. Her name is Mange Kimambi, and she's based out of LA, but she posts things and writes things about the Tanzanian political scene on her Instagram account. And literally within the space of, I'd like to say 4 months, she now has 1.1 million followers.
Wonderful. That's a lot of money. It's
a lot of money. and now even she's wondering to herself how she's going to monetize it. But it's interesting because she's not a journalist. She moves very intuitively. And sometimes even with the breaking stories or the breaking political stories, she'll do them in parts. And sometimes she'll be like, well, I'm going to bed. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. And because of the time difference, all of us are like, why won't she wake up? Why won't she wake up? What's part 3? What's part 4? So, somebody like that who in many ways doesn't even realize what she has done or what she's doing. She's been able to attract 1.1 million followers. And the Tanzanian government, they're also watching what she's saying. And now they have started, like I think it was our education minister starts replying to her in the comments. They start doing press conferences when she alleges something, because people send her tips. And when she alleges something or she comes up with one of her theories, and then they'll actually do a press conference and be like, that's not what happened. So you can see how quickly, it's incredibly disruptive, this mobile phone.
It's amazing that the regulators are being dragged to respond within the same space.
Absolutely.
You can think of the Linda Ikeji's in Nigeria. And in fact, I had a friend when I was going to law school, he's like, bye, I'm going to my phone. And he does this funny thing where he acts as his dad, his mom, the sister on Instagram. And he has millions of followers. Like, I would say, come, let's campaign. Our rights have been ripped. People don't care, but if he just says one thing, everyone just follows.
Right.
So power has shifted hands. It's no longer up there, it's in the mobile phone. So I agree with you, agreeing with him.
Yeah, and I don't think that we need to necessarily, there are still genres that haven't been discovered. I don't think that the story is over in terms of creativity. I think that with Africans, like you said, they come up with some of the most innovative stuff and you just find yourself watching it, but it's not a traditional romantic comedy. It's not a traditional horror or a drama. It's its own little mix. It's its own fusion. And rather than being like the African version of insert popular TV show here, it's really great when you see these, like your friend or this woman that I follow, coming up with, just intuitively coming up with creative stuff. Yeah.
Good. Ade?
To piggyback on what they said, I'll go with the matriarchal persona in the African family, the woman. I believe that if we invest in the woman, we're investing in the whole continent. Please, women, give yourself a round of applause. You know it's true. Yeah. So I believe mobile, all the devices and mediums follow after we push digital literacy to the women. The women would then impart to their sons. And we have like very strong leaders, Kwame Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara, some of those people that had the Pan-Africanism concepts. So I would say the woman first.
Thank you. So, Mr. Joe?
Yeah, not an easy one after you celebrate African women, and we've done the mobile. But I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the mobile because the mobile is the start of the story. You know, the mobile is the gatekeeper, but what are we really doing with the mobile, and what's the opportunity? And obviously, you have to believe in the opportunity that you're chasing, otherwise you should change jobs, I guess. So I think the big opportunity we see is very simply, how do we get to a point where we get quality local content that is to a level both in terms of how it's created and the production levels, so that Africa starts to tell its stories to the rest of the world. And you may be asking, why is a British guy living in Zambia saying this? I know I have those moments too. But I think the real thing here is that media is changing so fundamentally. You know, Facebook has 1.9 billion users today. The African continent has 1 billion people. Mobile penetration rates are going through the roof. You've got production costs for mobiles falling through the floor, which means that there is potentially a vast audience ready to consume content. So the question really becomes is, why is it interesting from a monetary perspective to be interested in people consuming content? Well, you know, the cost of the first drone that we flew commercially when I was doing production a couple of years back was $5,000, $10,000. The little Maverick now that you can pick up with, you know, $5K is $1,000. And there is an opportunity for everybody to become a producer in their own right. And Instagram started the story, but the next generation, I think, is so much further than this. So user-generated content on a continent with 1 billion people. Now, how do you monetize that? Well, brands, and I'm going to be careful about this because I've got customers waiting, but brands are doing a really crappy job, in my view, in engaging engaging African society in a meaningful conversation in order to promote their brands. My job is so easy because I walk in and I just say, hey guys, let's have a look at what you've been doing recently. And 80% of it is tactical offers. So just talking price and hammering this whole conversation home. But there's a story about building a brand, building a narrative, building a conversation, building a dialogue with a consumer. And that wasn't so important 5 years ago, but it's everything today. And I'll tell you why it's everything today. You have on social media 1.7 seconds when you post an advert as a brand to get your attention on the mobile device. 2.5 seconds on a desktop, which is not relevant to this conversation today. So brands now know that the marketplace resides on digital, but to be on digital, they have to entertain, or they have to inform, or they have to inspire. Those are your categories to start a conversation. And to make life even worse for you, on Facebook now, if I don't like Jake's stuff and he's a brand, I just switch him off my feed. And in order for Jake's stuff to come back on my feed, I think I have to like him 350 times again. So once you're off, you're off. Which means that there is a competitive marketplace for creativity and for entertainment, which brands now need to drive, which is such a big solution to the issue about where is the money going to come to create the content. And as somebody who's only very recently got into this, and I'm happy to tell you all that I've only been doing this for 3 years, I used to be an economist, the thing that really gets me inspired is big franchises in America, they're about to make Robin Hood the 19th version, or Batman's going to be refranchised again. We don't even know where to start the conversation about content because we've run out of ideas. And then we're sitting on an entire continent of storytellers And I can walk into any room with anyone I work with and sit down and have a conversation in their home with their amazing families and just start talking. Before I know it, I'm like scribbling down, being like, I think I've got my next 3 scripts here. So the conversation has never been, or sorry, the potential has never been more real than it is today. But the issue is how to connect the crisis and the opportunity together. The crisis is high data prices, mobile prices, a lack of young script writers, the talent available to actually create the content. But the opportunity is that every brand now needs to go to digital. And if you want to be on digital, you have to be on video. So we need to create a whole generation of inspired directors, script writers, who need to learn a whole new format. I mean, I got schooled the other day because I went to Facebook and I was like, so guys, this is our amazing TVC we did for Vodafone. And guess what? It got like 2 million views on Facebook. And they're like, cool, but you made it the wrong way. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, actually, this is the way you do it. And I was like, okay, what's that? And they're like, well, you should now be creating 4 short-form videos for Facebook, no longer than 15 seconds, potentially using boomerang technology, and then build your long-form afterwards. And when you kind of go away from it, you're like, okay, I get that. And then it becomes even more real because you're then sitting there being like, most major African state broadcasters can't give you real numbers as a brand anyway. They can't tell you what you're seeing. They can't tell you who your audience is. And there is this digital opportunity that is sitting there right now. And the thing that's even more compelling when you kind of play the final point, and I'm finishing, don't worry, is that there isn't, so Facebook's global algorithm basically says it has it's a media exchange. You go in and you bid. So I particularly want to get to Joe. Joe is my customer base, and I go and bid on Joe, and the value of that proposition is based on whoever else is bidding for Joe. But if there aren't enough people bidding for Joe, Joe becomes a cheap date for me. And at the moment, there aren't enough brands playing this game. So brands that engage on digital right now, and brands that become storytellers on a continent full of storytellers and empower a generation of storytellers, I think are going to have an amazing journey. And as you can tell, that's why I get excited by this stuff.
Brilliant. Please put your hands together for the 4 panelists. I am hearing and learning so much. The African story, which is not being told very well, talking from a woman's perspective and celebrating our women, recognizing the brands that we have and clinging to our phones. I think I should have held my phone in that lake, but no problem. It's okay. So up to you. Questions? Okay, maybe I would move around. Or is there any microphone? Okay, great. Let's start from here. The lady at the back. Ladies first.
If you want, we can share my mic and you can give that to me.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Eddie, and I am a Master of Public Policy candidate here at the Blavatnik School. My question is actually for Seko. You mentioned the white gaze, and we can think about that as a proxy for various other kinds of sort of dominant perspectives, a heteronormative gaze, etc. Could you speak a little bit about intersectionality and the importance of representing a multiplicity of experiences, so recognizing that we are multiple things simultaneously all of the time, and how do we affirm the multiplicity of our identities?
So, wow, where do I even start? I don't know if, when I set out to write or to produce or to take on a project, even up until last year, that intersectionality was something I was even thinking about, to be perfectly honest. I think maybe mid to late last year was when, I had seen it on my Twitter feed and some of my feminist blogs, but I had never really thought about how to, I would revisit the stuff that I've done, and I would see some of the problematic stuff that I've done as well. And so your question is really interesting because I am working on a new project right now, And I am asking myself a lot of questions and trying to figure out how to make sure that I incorporate a level of intersectionality. I don't know if I've answered your question. It's still something that it's still something that is percolating in my mind. So I don't think that I have because I really do feel, and maybe I really do feel that there's so many new terms and new ways of looking at things, and it's happening so rapidly. It's happening so fast. And so that's definitely something that's on the top of my mind, though. So maybe what I can do is we can exchange information and we can continue our conversation, because I don't think I have a very thoughtful response for you right now.
Great. Okay, we'll take a question from this end. So, yes, please. And we're very aware of time, so yeah.
Sorry. Thank you. It was some interesting points there, but can I just ask the money question? And that is, I'm a major retailer, and we support the media. And a lot of the traditional media is paid for by the advertising that we place in it. Increasingly, the traditional media is not delivering the message to the customers. Modern media, social media, doesn't deliver the message either in terms of driving revenue and driving sales into traditional, say, a supermarket business. Where do you see that going, and how am I, as an advertiser, going to actually get bang for my buck?
So, I mean, I think one of the things is, again, right, you look at the history of social media. It started off as an online community, a portal, a place for social conversation. And this is from a brand perspective, looking in. And then the next phase was about reach and engagement. So those are the metrics that everybody became very obsessed with. And the third thing is going to be about the ROI on the final sale. And complex customer journeys can now be integrated through multiple platforms in a way to increase the potentiality to get somebody into your store. Geo-targeting, hyper-targeting, sequential messaging are all there to be designed. So you can actually have a conversation with a customer in a far more detailed way than you've ever thought you could have before. But it's just changing so quickly. Facebook's releasing 190 advertising products alone in a month's time. They change their platform every month. And in terms of traditional media, I don't think that traditional media has been working that well for quite a long time, personally, in Africa. And that asks you, I think it should ask you the question, which is, what am I trying to do with my media and my marketing? Am I trying to build the brand, or am I trying to push sales? And I'd suggest that you need to have a great brand in order to have a conversation with your customer about the end point, the end price. And I mean, just so everybody's just thinking like big picture here, 92% of all transactions in the most advanced economies in the world still happen in stores. Africa's 99.9%, I'm pretty sure. So social media isn't answering questions out of Africa that Africa isn't answering. It's the fact that the whole dialogue's still being developed today. But there is so much to be done in this space. And if you ask what the potential is to get the millennials working in advertising firms like mine, or working in your markets, to actually answer some of the big questions, because I'm too old for Snapchat.
Okay, so we'll take 3 questions all together, and when we take the questions in group, you all will just, if you can respond in just 1 or 2 sentences. But please feel free to write your questions down on paper. Feel free to meet with them, consult with them after this. We're very, very short with time. So your questions, very, very briefly. We'll take, 3 questions. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 3 hands up. Just 1 sentence.
Yeah, my name is Ade. I'm a student here at the Black Ethnic School. I'm just curious to know your take on the spate of internet shutdowns in Africa. What does that portend for the media business? Thank you.
Okay, internet shutdowns in Africa. There's someone here. Okay.
Hi, thanks for speaking with us today. My name is Hamza, and I'm a student of telecoms with business at UCL. So my question is about mergers and acquisitions. So how do you weigh the convergence against the innovation driving specifically in Africa? regarding mergers and acquisition of content developing with the ISPs or the local incumbent operator. Thank you.
Okay. Mergers and acquisition.
It's a very quick point to the first question, and actually the first and second questions are so diametrically opposed. It was quite interesting. On the first one, intersectionality, I think probably the topic is probably more in terms of narratives, intertextuality, in terms of actually how we see ourselves on the global stage. So I think, in terms of the humanities, it's really intertextuality and actually how Africa is seen in the diaspora, etc. The second point related to that is actually how, not just in terms of identity, but actually how we manage within media and Facebook, etc., have this issue, Twitter, is how we actually maintain civility in discourse. And that's actually how you have a plurality of opinions that creates a constructive dialogue. And there's absolutely no doubt that the major platforms have an issue around how we actually manage civility amongst our different constituents, right? Just in terms of the third point, with someone with a public policy background in media, this isn't actually about advertising. I think this is, advertising is actually, to be honest, a fraction of world trade. And I think it's a huge shortchanging of the opportunity for it to be skewed too much into advertising-driven conversations.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Mr. Joseph Hundah, final words.
I think the big problem that we have I think I agree with you about advertising. Advertising actually is really pretty small proportion of revenues generated out of media. Really, really small. And I'm not sure whether, I think Jono probably know better than I, whether that's because brands really believe that they don't get delivery of the numbers that they're looking for out of media platforms. I think it's also largely to do with the fact that there's too many media players in Africa, to be honest, especially on the free-to-air front, too many radio stations, too many TV stations. And even if you, as a brand, if you've got $1 million and you are sitting in the middle of Uganda and you've got 50 TV stations, which TV station are you going to put your advert on to deliver to the audiences you want to? So that's the problem. So I think there's a problem with regulation. South Africa probably has the right formula, and that is only really licensed 4 TV stations. And for an economy that big, that makes a lot more sense to me. But in Nigeria, you have more than 200 TV stations. I don't care how big the economy is. 200 TV stations is too many.
With 180 million people.
It doesn't matter. The point is that, so if you're a brand, you're trying to advertise, which station are you actually going to put your content on? There's too many stations. So I think African regulation is too liberal. We give away too many licenses without any thought process attached to it. And most of it was driven mainly by political aspirations by people who want to create a mouthpiece for parties and stuff. So I think that's a big problem. But I think overall, I didn't understand the mergers and acquisitions question. It sounded interesting, but I didn't get it.
Just a...
Oh, I see. I think the industry is still a bit too small. There aren't enough content players as such to create a merger and acquisition environment. I think there's one big player in the media environment in Africa, and we know who that is. And I don't think there isn't that much space for mergers and acquisitions at that level yet.
Point. Seko, Shamte, final words.
I think, if I understood his question properly, I think that what he's talking about is that is a very big problem. I mean, in Tanzania right now, like I said, there's been a lot of pushback against our current president. And there are some cyber laws that have been passed that the scenario that you speak of could very well be enacted. And that they'll be like, there's too much pushback on the internet, and we are going to switch off WhatsApp, we're going to switch off Instagram and Facebook and what have you. And I mean, even for our country, it would take a while. I mean, but it's a plausible scenario. And I think I'd like to say, was it Cameroon? Was it Cameroon?
Yeah, Cameroon.
In the south.
Yeah, and I mean, that is one that is a very serious issue.
Can I make one point? You know, the
Go
one thing
ahead.
about African governments is if you don't understand something, you regulate it. This is exactly what happened.
I think
Shut it down.
they did it in India as well. I think yes?
Yeah.
Like within the past couple of months? In India as well, they were like,
But it is worth
Cut it off.
It is not worth noting that there is not precedence to suggest that when you turn off the internet, it always turns out well for governments.
Well, that's
So
true.
it's a bit of a 50-50. If you
That's
actually
true.
look at what took place
No,
in
but that's
Egypt,
true.
it's a really good example.
but I mean, if they do shut it down in a particular geographical area for like a month,
That's going to be,
still do quite a bit of damage.
Okay, Ade, Olufeko.
Yeah, to Ade's, my namesake's question about the shutdowns, it did happen in other parts like China and North Korea. They just shut it down, and they had the cyber attacks and all those things. I will go with Fela. How many people know Fela? I hope everybody knows Fela here. They know one quench, they know one wound. I'm not a singer, but basically what he's saying is that the population, Pan-African, the whole population, the human capital, we move much quicker than what could be regulated. The regulated is an act of fear, but once people understand economics and commerce, people can shut down the government. I'm not saying that's what we should do. What I'm trying to say is that innovate as quickly as possible, create international partnerships with all these organizations like in humanities, UNICEF, that will counter the government and impose sanctions that will prevent that from happening.
All right.
I'm just going to, in one sentence, try and talk about plurality of perspectives and have a go at this one against someone in policy making. But I think the issue is with plurality is it is in the places where you've had the most repression that you see the most expression, and that traditional dynamic has never been so scary, because when we talk about expression now, we talk about people being able to get into a position where they can post and they can build audiences overnight. So, if there was something wrong 15 years ago, there was something wrong and you had something localized. Now you can actually have a genuine start of a massive conversation in a country based on the fact that all of that repression can now be expressed through social media. And I think while it's dangerous, it's also healthy, because we need these dynamics to balance out repression and expression.
All right, thank you so much for a great session. Please put your hands together for our great panelists here today. I mean, we can deny it or defend it, we can denounce it or decorate it, but the fact remains that the African media is transforming and we have a role to play around that. Thank you. There's an announcement.